Welcome to MAP, the bi-weekly market access podcast hosted by me, Dr. Stefan Walzer. I am the innovator of Market Access 4.0 and a health economist by training and working in the fields of market access, reimbursement, pricing, and health economics since 2004. Discover Market Access 4.0 and unveil the future with our innovative solutions. Max Insights, our fast and easy AI-based reimbursement planning platform. Dobo, our new revolutionizing way of creating reimbursement dossiers across the globe with the first and only dossier writing AI bot. Cubo, our new AI-based objection handling platform. And Waffle, train with Waffle's virtual reality genius in an immersive environment and with an AI-based counterpart. We are Market Access 4.0. So check out our website, marketaccess4-0.com. And now let's dive into the current discussions, processes, and trends in market access across the globe. So good morning, Johan, for another, I think, very interesting podcast session. Today, we'll speak about, let's say, investing, investment, and everything around it. And of course, covering that with respect to healthcare, and as we're the Market Access podcast, as well with respect to market access. So welcome, Johan. And before we start, obviously, I would be happy if you could introduce yourself quickly, that everybody who does not know you already will then at least know you from that point in time.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here, Stefan. And a few words about myself so that you understand where I'm coming from. So myself, I've been active in the life science industry for plus 25 years, working closely with entrepreneurs, investors, and growing and scaling businesses from an international perspective. Kicked off in Sweden, then in England, and quite a few years in Switzerland. And now I'm back in Sweden, working with investors and entrepreneurs.
Perfect. So I think the right target, I would guess. But I think you have already mentioned investors and all of the kind of, let's say, environment. I mean, what excites you basically most about investing in maybe especially early stage healthcare companies, and maybe also cover with that respect also a bit the kind of unique or general kind of challenges what you see in that space?
In that space, I would say I would distinguish it between biotech therapeutics and medtech, digital health and diagnostics companies. So if I elaborate a bit about the first group of companies, the biotech therapeutics company, I think that what makes it exciting for me is that it's an extremely fast-paced moving field due to now it's technology that drives. Technology open up new areas that were not possible in the past, from identifying and being efficient from a time and cost perspective. We had CRISPR, now we have AI, lots of innovation that really speeds up. And at the same time, it's a high uncertainty. So from a regulatory point of view, it's very formalized. And those things aren't not something one can change. But from an investor's perspective, I see how can one mitigate the risk that is outside of the science. Biology will always be biology. So as we all know, no matter how strong the scientific team is in the company, we can't predict biology. It's really hard. But that, from my perspective, makes it exciting. And there are always things when it comes to the development plan, how to design the clinical trials, to try to get real life data. And that we know now, there are big corporations like IQVIA, there are smaller companies, popping up companies with AI that all actually have solutions that, in my opinion, should be affordable, because the benefit of mitigating the risk of dilution for the existing founders and early investors, it's about mitigating the risk profile. So that's one part. And then connecting that to the topic that we are here to talk about today, is the market access, pricing, reimbursement. And that's a topic that many say, it's not my job. We will only bring it to end of phase 1, phase 2A, and then we will out-license and they take care of it. Yes, that might be your business case. However, if you want to get the most out of your asset, a licensing deal, being able to communicate the true value of your innovation, then you need to be able to show the whole value creation journey.
Yeah.
So that somebody from the outside, if it's a licensee or if it's a investor, with their experience, can understand how you see it and whether also they spot opportunities that they can add value to your value creation journey and also understand the risk profile.
Yeah, no, exactly. So if I get you basically right, obviously, and I agree with that, I think the whole kind of sector is especially characterized by high uncertainty. And I think the key reason for me is especially, I mean, you said it, biology is always biology, but that's, I think, the core of it, right? I mean, if you take this as given, you have already high uncertainty because you could have theories around it, you could have different models around it. But if you then basically go and test it in humans in real life in a way, it could also still, let's say, not work out.
Yeah.
But on top of that, obviously, you have further uncertainties, which is, I think, as you said, maybe more regulatory, which is maybe in a kind of more clear frame. But then also the whole kind of, let's say, pricing, reimbursement, and everything linked to each other with respect to kind of developing the right clinical trial program, as you mentioned as well, the kind of development plan. So, I mean, this is obviously what sounds, and it is, a very complex kind of topic. I mean, what I sometimes have heard, also from different investors, is when it comes to market access and pricing, why should I be thinking that early? Because ultimately, you know, I basically spend money across different companies. And if one would make it to the market, I mean, that would basically bring me already in terms of return on investment, everything back, even for the ones which fail, which I personally think is not really the right way to go. But what is your opinion on that one before we maybe jump a bit more into the topic of market access and the like?
My take on it from I'm working with assisting investors and conduct valuations, valuation tools, and the identifying the specific market is important and understanding. Of course, if you have a late preclinical project, you haven't locked the TPP. However, you have the hypothesis based on the preclinical data. And that hypothesis, I will say, it's a moving part along the journey, but you need to start with something. And then you fine tune it. When you get, if you're lucky, you get the data that support your hypothesis. But very often you have to tweak it. And then we also know that on the market, based on what happens, drugs are retracted from the market, and you might need to adapt if you have a close mechanism of action of something that has not shown to be as favorable as one thought, what FDA thought when they approved it. So I think that there's always something one can do. One should do something when it comes to understanding the reimbursement. I have been in contact with companies that in-license an asset and wanted to bring it to the Scandinavian market. And when they talked to a price and reimbursement firm, they received the answer, you will not be able, with the safety and efficacy profile, you will not be able to get this product reimbursed in Scandinavia. And to me, if they would have thought about it earlier, they would have not have been sitting with an asset where they will miss not the huge market, but still a market. And depending on which market one is talking about, one need to understand. So one way I would say is almost think about early on which label you aim for and go back and see what is required, what have others done to get that label. And then you have a good framework for the development path. So to design in the clinical trial, also understand how is it a way for us to be more efficient. during that journey and strengthen the case, what do we need to do to get the label? So, but you know more about those specificities.
Yeah, no, I feel agree. I think that was a quite nice kind of, let's say, circle, which then as well brought you down to the, I would say, the message: invest in market access slash reimbursement concepts, at least early enough that you can also understand where your market is, or whether it's maybe not reimbursable, but maybe there's a, I don't know, out of pocket market, right? Which is also sometimes the kind of idea, and could still be very lucrative, right? It just depends what kind of product you have. You mentioned as well in your early, let's say, words that, I mean, you also cover digital health, for example, and there are good examples where people, even in Europe, would basically be willing to pay out of pocket to use such a kind of device or diagnostic, whatever it is, right? But I think you would need to know it early on, and that is where you would need to know, is it reimbursable? If so, how would you get into that kind of direction? And also, what would be the price? I mean, that's another kind of thing which I would imagine is very important for the investors, which is basically bringing the ultimate kind of business question together, right? So what is the price and what is the volume, which is giving you the maximum or the optimum kind of revenue stream, right?
Exactly. And I tend to be like, when we want to introduce a case, it's to think about which is the business case, the population, the subgroup of the target population that gets you clinical data, because that's the significant value increase of the value creation journey. So, because if you can design and find a subgroup of your target indications, that will mean faster, less costly, and then it doesn't mean that the rest of the population or other indications are available. It's just that you take it later on, not at the start. And because that is also where you can get a higher price point in my experience. And then you will be negotiated down for bigger indications. But it's very tough if you aim that way around, when you go for big indication, low price, and say that these poor people is truly suffering, but they should pay the double. That doesn't fly. So from a lifetime cycle strategy, I think that it all ties together. It's an aligned story.
Yeah.
The early on science, the development plan, the price and reimbursement strategies, it needs to be connected.
Yeah, no. I think another very important point. I fully agree, and obviously, let's say that's at least what we have also seen in actual negotiation with payers, right? I mean, of course, they always complain that the price is too high. It's their job, right?
Yeah,
Of course,
of course.
it's their job.
Yeah.
But I think I mean, if you take a step back and just review it from a more objective perspective, right? I mean, you basically see that ultimately, besides other things, budget impact is a key driver, meaning the more or the higher the target population, the more likely that you would get a very high kind of price pressure. And obviously, as well, the other way around, when you take potential comparators as well out of the equation, right? If there are comparators in there, obviously that as well plays into account. But that's at least a very important consideration as well. And if you really have a compound or product in your hand where you would basically be able to also maybe target different indications or disease areas, it is, of course, important not only to prioritize maybe the countries with the higher prices, but also then the indications. Because I mean, ultimately, where you have the bigger value and maybe call it optimal kind of target population, maybe the price could be higher. And I think very important, maybe for everybody, at least outside of the US, the price, or let's say the direction of the price, at least in Europe, is only in one way, right? It always just goes down. And that's, I think, an important thing as well to keep in mind.
And I think that's one thing that when we conduct evaluations of assets, and yes, we identify analogs, but sometimes cases can really be turned almost upside down when having payer interviews. So that's something that I think is very important, well worth to invest in, because that also investors knows about it. We all know that is a critical part, and it is like a black box. So the payer interviews, yes, they are not cheap, but it's really worthwhile because it strengthens the commercial case.
Yeah, no. I think that's another important point. I just had that as well in mind, which is maybe a bit like kind of external partnership. I mean, even if you would say, look, I mean, it's just an interview or just a discussion with a payer, it's not a real partnership, but you get at least early insights, right? Which is also part of the, let's say, market access strategy, right? That it's not just what you think and what you would believe, but you would basically need to pressure test it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we see when one try to, as I talk about the volume, identifying the core population, what is, yeah, one looking into the treatment algorithm. But that is theory. Then when you talk with physicians, then they might say that, yes, there are these guidelines because very often it's guidelines. It's not a set rule. They have lots of flexibility, the physicians. And that's also to say, no, we stick to this because it's connected very often to the pricing and reimbursement part. What they actually can do from the hospital in the US, from hospitals and insurances that individuals have, if it's a private insurance, or like in the US or like in Sweden where I sit, if it's a government that pays for it. Within a certain corridor, they have some flexibility, but it's not that big, but it's still worthwhile to understand. And that is why connectivity with the people that actually makes the decisions with the patients or with the agencies when it comes to payers. I think that's very important, and not think that one can find everything by reading secondary research.
Yeah, exactly.
That is dangerous.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. I fully agree. I think that's really dangerous. I think, if somebody would now follow our discussion and they would maybe understand that, somehow I would need to do, or at least take as well reimbursement market access into early consideration. What would be your kind of recommendations, especially to early stage companies, to maybe startups? I mean, how are you guiding your, let's say, clients or companies you work with through that kind of process?
I think that it's important to understand identify analogs on the market and see, and not just picking this is what we want to be. What you really need to connect it with the development plan and see, and based on that, be honest to yourself when it comes to the potential efficacy and safety profile. What is the likelihood? And you can usually find quite a bit in the literature because you need to be better in one way or another to be reimbursed in the first place. You can't just be the same. So that sets the baseline. And then look into scenarios, do research. So do you believe that now me and my team understand it? And then you contact the price and reimbursement agency so that you have done as much legwork as you can do and have specific questions. Because then it's a way for price and reimbursement agency. So give you guidelines that is, I tend to call it fit for purpose.
Yeah.
And I know that there are firms out there that understand that the high value clients is one segment, but in order to support the whole ecosystem, one might have to share for smaller fees information that is as a huge value to these companies because it's a sanity check. But so I think it's that doing as much as one can oneself, aligning the story, the core science, the development plan, analogs, and then bring specific questions to professionals out there that live this day in and day out.
Yeah.
And not just go to ChatGPT. That I know I use ChatGPT, but once still it's not the holy grail. But and think that I ChatGPT, it's cheap. You need to then have people that understand the space that actually challenge what comes out. That's what I see today quite a lot. That people use it, biotechs use it to, and if they understand the field, they will be very critical. But if there are areas where they have less experience, one will, oh, that's how it works. But one know oneself. When one asks ChatGPT for areas when one have a very long experience in, one see nuances, or because usually not it's completely wrong, but it is important nuances that I would not build a strategy on.
Exactly, exactly. I think that's a very, very important point as well. I mean, it's the same as I would. I'm an economist, right? So if I would basically go in there and just try to understand biology, right? Top level, I can do that, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I can read, I can, follow the whole kind of story and everything. But if it gets a bit more into the details, and I would, let's say, go back and just ask ChatGPT, of course, it could be that I would just think, oh, that's fine, that makes sense, but.
Yeah.
We also know, I mean, also out of, for example, ad boards where we had then physicians, let's say, attending, that sometimes it was even those kind of little things where they just, that can't be because of 1, 2, 3, 4. And say, oh, okay, interesting. And that's obviously differentiating, let's say, experts versus the other parts, right? And everybody is strong somewhere, right? But that's maybe as well something keeping in mind. I mean, if somebody is really developing a product, whether it's medtech or a pharma product, I mean, they have probably the strength in that, right? Or maybe in general management or business administration. It doesn't matter. But I think important is to keep an eye on the overall kind of picture that includes payers, not only, let's say, the regulatory side and or maybe the target physicians as well. And I mean, the other complexity, I mean, we're sitting here in Europe. I mean, Europe is not, basically it's a continent, right? But it's not ultimately a market, at least not in healthcare.
Yeah.
I mean, what is your take on that? Let's say when somebody's basically, for example, developing a product out of Sweden and is then maybe thinking about at least, let's say, doing the right steps in terms of commercialization, leave the reimbursement and everything a bit outside. But what is your recommendation? Should they basically approach it? Because I mean, from my experience, I know that it's not always Germany to go first. Yes, it's big, but sometimes it takes ages until you get, for example, reimbursement. So what are those thoughts about from an investor's perspective?
Yeah, I actually, that's a topic, and foremost, I would say it's a very hot topic in the medtech digital health diagnostics, where each country have their own path and journeys. And if I talk a little bit more about the digital health, as it's new, so to speak, there are lots of moving targets. Yes, there are things out there in the public domain that said this is how it works, but then it's so many ifs, and there are quite a bit of leeway. It's not granted, it's not black or white. It's a gray zone in many ways. And the different countries have different frameworks. So sometimes I say that it could be better to consider after your home market that most people start with to go to the US directly, but at least consider and not thinking I take it. If it's in Sweden, I take Sweden, then Norway, then Denmark, then move into Germany, France, Benelux. That might not be because it's geographically close. There might be a better one to jump at and consider the reimbursement complexity. And as you say, the timelines. Because especially in that space, what I learned during the past few years is it's a lot. You can lose lots of time. That's how I should put it, by not planning and understanding the reimbursement route, because that will affect your business model.
Yeah.
And that will affect the valuation. And I very often come from the dilution of early investors, as that's where I am myself, and also who I represent, and the founders.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I think just while you mentioned the US, obviously, I'm not a top US expert, I would say, but I understand, let's say, top level. And I think even there, I mean, sometimes it's difficult to, let's say, directly concur the whole US, right? I mean, sometimes, especially in medtech, you basically need to start in a state or maybe in 2, 3 states. First start there, and then just over time, it might as well evolve into the full market. So that's as well something keeping in mind, and especially maybe if you are located in Europe, it might be even more difficult, but you need people in the US. Otherwise, you cannot be successful.
Yeah. And that's also like with the commercialization, as you mentioned, it's if we step a bit sideways, and then I would say it's having that presence. Some people think that, oh, distributors will do it all. But it takes a lot of job with incentive structure to manage, to train. It's an organization it itself to manage them, to reap the benefit of a strategic, a commercial agreement with a distributor. So I tend to say that, yeah, you can do part of it yourself, distributors, but one that is quite good is the white label. If you have a possibility to be part of your technology is part of another company's product, so they can jump in innovation, as we talk about early phase companies, I think that is something, but then you are in the same boat. Yes, they will take more of, if one think of a revenue sharing, but you're in the same boat as them, and you do not compete in a catalog with hundreds of other products. And the sales team will push where they get the highest commission. So, and for them to introduce a new novel technology that would be much better, it's probably harder than just keeping the clients on where they have good relations and they like products. Why disrupt my annual bonus? I think this is something like the incentives for all the individuals that are involved in from when your innovation leave your hands in the commercialization journey.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, getting a bit towards the end of our discussion, maybe just summarize maybe the top 3 things to do if I would be an early startup, when I would be planning or start to be thinking, rather, probably better, start to be thinking about commercialization in the future. What would be considerations, point to take, and maybe really things to think about? Top 3.
The first one, but it's a broad one, it's you need to present an aligned story. And with that, I mean that at the end of the day, it's the technology or the science that is the driver of the value and why somebody would be interested. Then you need to find the commercial fit, the market. Within that market, you need to understand who is willing to pay and why are they willing to pay and how does that work. I think these 3 parts are the key elements for that to think of even early on as we are discussing, and not thinking we will not bring it to the finishing line. You need to understand so that you can convince a licensee or investors, strategic partners, why this is going to make them money.
Not perfect. I think that's a perfect end, I would say. We have been speaking a lot about, let's say, also solutions instead of, let's say, just bringing up things to consider or things which are maybe not working that well. I think we have a great, ecosystem still also of startups, especially in the healthcare area. In Europe, I know it in Sweden, but also across the world. But I think very important really to consider not only the kind of short-term goals, which is maybe put the kind of, let's say, ingredient into a clinical trial, which is obviously important, but also consider already regulatory and market access in order to have, as you said it, a full and aligned story across the whole kind of at least short-term life cycle.
Just want to add one last thing that I almost forgot, and that's how it changed. The industry changed. 10 years ago, lot of the topics that we are discussing now, they were not required to be conducted by the entrepreneur. The VC analysts and the BD teams in pharma or bigger medical companies did that. Now you need to do that yourself. You need to do part of the job that the other side did.
Yeah.
So that's
an interesting one.
That's a big shift that I have witnessed over my time as a small fish in this industry. But that puts more, and I can see it. I speak with companies that get the feedback on the pitch decks. You need to describe this. And it's the more you can describe, as we discussed, the whole journey, value progression journey, it's the high likelihood to get an interest, because I think it's partly also linked to that it's so competitive. We are so connected globally. There are great innovations all around the globe. Everybody get flooded on the buy side of the spectrum, get flooded with innovation. And I think that's where, as an entrepreneur, that's what you can do. Biology is biology, but there are still things outside of biology that you ought to do to increase your success rate from getting a deal done.
That's perfect. Johan, perfect final words. Thank you for your time, for your insights. Looking forward to the next kind of steps and further discussions. Thank you, Johan.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. Bye.
What have you learned? I think ultimately, and I like the quote really, biology is biology, which basically means from a maybe more market access pricing perspective that, let's say, the mode of action and the way maybe the ingredient or the product basically works is out of the control, at least for the market access pricing persons, which also means that there is already high uncertainty, as I discussed with Johan already. But ultimately, in order to, let's say, decrease further uncertainty, especially maybe then to plan for commercialization, including price and volume, is to get a good understanding of the market. And that basically means to have a very good and decent understanding and knowledge about the market access and reimbursement requirements and pathways. Because ultimately, this might also mean that if you're not aware of a hurdle, which might potentially even give you a setback, or at least takes a lot of time until to basically take that hurdle and move forward. What does that mean? Ultimately, try to get and involve the reimbursement experts early enough. Johan mentioned as well already early on, there are various as well already artificial intelligence platforms now available, which brings and gives as well insights for a very affordable price and in a very short time frame, which also helps obviously, and especially when maybe planning a presentation in front of investors. Very important. Finally, also, it's not only about the planning itself and having maybe the commercial plan and the success in mind. It's also that the knowledge about reimbursement and the potential price and the insights from payers is also giving further value in discussions with investors. That was an episode of MAP, the market access podcast provided by Mars Market Access and Pricing Strategy, which is your healthcare consultancy in the German-speaking markets. MAP is available every second week with a new episode, so watch out. And in case you might have questions, contact me directly and or visit our website on www.marketaccess-pricingstrategy.de.